The harbor is still. Black water, no moon, no wind. A Russian reload barge sits alongside Pier 7 of the Novorossiysk naval base, her decks stacked 3 meters high with sealed cylindrical canisters. Kalibr crews, missile shipping containers, each one painted naval gray, each one labeled with Cyrillic stencils that Russian dock crews no longer bother to read carefully. They have been moving these containers for weeks. The rhythm has become routine. That is the problem. Somewhere across the Black Sea, in a room that does not officially exist, Ukrainian naval intelligence analysts are watching a live satellite feed. The timestamp in the corner of their screen shows the current hour in the Eastern European time zone. A senior officer sets down his coffee. He looks at the pier layout one more time. He looks at the fuel manifold on the barge's portside deck. He looks at the warship riding at anchor 200 meters off the pier head. A Bion M-class corvette, missile tubes empty, waiting for her next load. He picks up a radio handset. 3 words. In Ukrainian. The operation begins. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What you're about to hear is a reconstruction of one of the most consequential naval strikes in the Black Sea theater. A Ukrainian long-range drone attack on Russian missile logistics infrastructure deep inside Novorossiysk harbor. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. To understand why this harbor became a target, you have to understand what happened to the Russian Black Sea Fleet in the preceding years of full-scale war. The fleet that once operated freely out of Sevastopol, the historic naval base on the Crimean Peninsula, had been systematically dismantled by Ukrainian strikes. The guided missile cruiser Moskva sunk by Neptune anti-ship missiles. The landing ship Saratov destroyed in Berdyansk. The submarine Rostov-on-Don struck in Sevastopol dry dock. The landing ship Minsk destroyed in the same facility days later. One by one, Ukrainian naval intelligence had hunted the Black Sea Fleet across its own waters. Russia's response was to pull the surviving fleet eastward, away from Ukrainian coastal missile range, away from the drone-infested waters near Odessa, into Novorossiysk, a commercial and naval port on the Russian Krasnodar coast, nearly 300 kilometers east of Sevastopol. Deeper, safer. Or so Russian naval planners believed. They were wrong about the safety. But it took Ukrainian planners time, patient, methodical time, to prove it. The Black Sea Fleet's eastward repositioning created a new logistical problem. Novorossiysk was not designed to be a frontline naval strike base. Its infrastructure for handling cruise missile munitions was inadequate. Resupply chains were longer. The naval ammunition depot that fed Sevastopol's missile inventory was now separated from the strike vessels by a journey across water that Ukrainian drones were increasingly capable of reaching. So Russia improvised. As Russian military planners tend to do when confronted with a problem they caused by their own failures, they built a workaround that created a new vulnerability. They began using a converted cargo barge, designated in Russian naval records as BDK 1447, though Ukrainian intelligence simply called her the Pier 7 barge, as a floating missile transfer station. Rather than moving missiles from shore storage to ships through fixed cranes and documented transfer procedures, the barge allowed Russian logistics crews to pre-position Kalibr canisters closer to the corvettes and frigates that needed them. It reduced transfer time. It concentrated the inventory in a single mobile node. In the language of military targeting, it was a gift. Ukrainian naval intelligence had been tracking the barge's movement patterns for weeks. Satellite imagery from commercial providers, cross-referenced with signals, intelligence, and reports from human intelligence assets in the Krasnodar region, gave analysts a granular picture of the reload rhythm. The barge moved to Pier 7 consistently during specific operational cycles, always within a predictable window before a Bion M-class corvette prepared to sail. Always loaded within a 2-day window. Always connected to the pier's electrical grid through a cable running from a junction box at the pier head. That cable mattered. It told analysts that the barge's own power generation was offline during pier transfers, meaning the barge's electronic countermeasures and radar warning systems were drawing power from shore. A disruption to pier electrical infrastructure would temporarily blind the barge. 3 weeks of observation, dozens of satellite passes, pattern analysis run through Ukrainian military intelligence software that had been refined through 2 years of successful strike operations. The picture was complete. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? The sea drones that hit the barge first, the FPV strike drones that followed up, or the Kalibr missiles that detonated in the chain reaction? Comment below with A, B, or C. We'll give the tactical answer at the end. The strike package Ukrainian planners assembled was not improvised. Every element had been calculated based on the specific vulnerabilities of Novorossiysk harbor. The harbor's entrance channel runs roughly northeast to southwest, with the commercial port facilities on the western side and the naval pier complex on the eastern side. The water depth at Pier 7 averages 12 meters, deep enough for naval vessels, but shallow enough that a drone operating on the surface would show minimal radar cross-section against the pier's own infrastructure clutter. Ukrainian naval drones. The Magura V5 class surface drones that had already demonstrated their capability in earlier Black Sea operations were loaded with shaped charge warheads optimized for below-waterline hull penetration. Each Magura V5 carries approximately 320 kilograms of explosive payload. At a top speed of 42 knots, they are difficult to intercept once they have closed to within 3 kilometers of a target. At night, without thermal imaging in optimal position, they are nearly invisible on radar until they are within lethal range. 4 Magura V5 drones were assigned to the primary strike package. Their mission: approach from the southwest along the harbor entrance channel, using commercial vessel radar shadows as concealment during the final approach leg, then accelerate to maximum speed for the terminal attack run against the barge's waterline. But the planners knew that surface drones alone would not complete the mission. The Kalibr canisters on the barge's deck were in armored shipping containers. A waterline hit would flood the barge and potentially cause a fire, but would not necessarily detonate the missile warheads stored above the waterline in sealed containers, to cause a catastrophic ammunition cook-off, the kind of chain reaction that would make the barge and its cargo permanently unavailable. Ukrainian planners needed to hit the deck cargo directly. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes of this operation eliminates an entire Russian missile logistics node and sets the Black Sea Fleet's strike capability back by weeks. That is where the second element came in. Ukrainian long-range strike drones. Modified Bober-class platforms, each carrying a precision munition package, would approach on a different azimuth, flying low over the water at altitudes below 50 meters to defeat Russian coastal air defense radar coverage. Their targeting was preloaded with GPS coordinates for the barge's deck cargo area, with an optical terminal guidance update from a high-altitude surveillance drone orbiting 40 kilometers away at the edge of Russian air defense engagement range. The third element was electronic. A Ukrainian EW drone, an electronic warfare platform that Ukrainian defense industries had developed specifically for harbor approach operations, would precede the main strike package by approximately 8 minutes. Its mission: broadcast a spoofing signal on the frequencies used by the harbor's vessel traffic management radar system, creating false returns that would confuse Russian radar operators during the critical approach window. Not a total blackout. That would trigger an alert. Just enough noise to make the surface drone signatures ambiguous for the 4 minutes they needed. The coordination required between these 3 elements, surface drones, airstrike drones, and electronic warfare platform, was the real operational challenge. The EW drone had to arrive first. The surface drones had to hit the barge's waterline within 60 seconds of the EW window opening. The airstrike drones had to arrive over the barge's deck no more than 45 seconds after the waterline hits, because the blast and fire from the surface drone impacts would generate thermal bloom that would confuse the optical guidance on the airstrike drone's terminal seekers if the delay was too long. 60-second window, 45-second follow-up. Coordinated across 3 different platform types operating on separate radio frequencies, from launch points spread across nearly 200 kilometers of Black Sea water. This was not improvised. This was the product of Ukrainian naval innovation that had been building for years. The obstacle came 40 minutes before launch. One of the 4 Magura V5 surface drones reported a navigation system fault during pre-launch checks. The drone's inertial navigation unit, the component that allows the drone to maintain course without GPS during the final approach phase, when Russian electronic warfare jamming is typically at its most intense, was showing a calibration error. The strike was scheduled. The window was set. Pulling the faulty drone from the package meant reducing the waterline strike payload by 25%. Replacing it was not an option. The backup drone was 30 kilometers away at a different launch position, and repositioning it would have pushed the launch time past the planned window. The Ukrainian naval officer commanding the operation made the call in less than 90 seconds. 3 Magura V5 drones. Adjusted approach formation to compensate. Targeting priorities redistributed. 2 drones targeting the barge's midship waterline where the structural frame was weakest. 1 drone targeting the stern where the barge's fuel storage was located. 3 drones. Adjusted. The operation continues. The decision illustrated something fundamental about Ukrainian military capability at this phase of the war. Ukrainian commanders at all levels had learned to adapt in real time, to recalculate under pressure, to execute with reduced resources rather than abort. Russian commanders, operating under a doctrine that punished initiative and required referral upward for any deviation from plan, did not have this capability. The asymmetry was not just in equipment. It was an institutional culture. At the planned launch hour, the EW drone lifted from its operating position over international waters and turned northeast toward Novorossiysk. Flying at 40 meters above the Black Sea surface, its radar cross-section was minimal. Russian coastal surveillance radar at Cape Myskako, the headland guarding the western approach to Novorossiysk harbor, was operating on its standard rotation schedule. The radar sweep cycle was 11 seconds. The EW drone's approach profile was designed to minimize its exposure during each sweep, using speed changes and altitude adjustments timed to the radar's rotation pattern. A pattern Ukrainian intelligence had documented through weeks of signals collection. 8 minutes after EW drone launch, the 3 Magura V5 surface drones entered the water from their transport vessels. Each drone powered up its electric drive system, extended its antenna array, and began navigating toward the harbor entrance on the coordinates loaded into its navigation computer. At this point, they were 47 kilometers from Pier 7, at cruising speed, 17 knots to minimize their acoustic and visual signature. They would reach the harbor entrance in approximately 83 minutes. The harbor at Novorossiysk at this hour had normal maritime traffic. A bulk carrier anchored in the outer roads waiting for a berth. 2 coastal tankers tied up at the commercial pier. A Russian naval support vessel, a small tender, moving slowly between the naval pier complex and a refueling buoy in the inner harbor. The surface drones would need to navigate through this traffic. Their autonomous navigation systems were programmed to avoid collisions with vessels above a certain radar cross-section threshold. But the approach route had been chosen specifically because the bulk carrier at anchor in the outer roads would provide radar shadow coverage for the final 15 kilometers of the approach before the drones accelerated for the terminal run. How many Kalibr missile canisters did Ukrainian strikes eliminate in this operation? A-23 canisters, B-38 canisters, C-47 canisters. The answer is coming at the end. Drop your guess in the comments now. At the naval pier, the Russian barge crew was following their evening routine. The barge had a crew complement of 11, a mix of civilian contract maritime workers who handled logistics and loading operations, and 4 Russian Navy enlisted personnel who provided security and operated the barge's basic systems. None of the 11 had combat experience. They had been assigned to what Russian Naval Logistics Command considered a rear area support function. They were not expecting an attack. The harbor defense arrangements at Novorossiysk were better than they had been in earlier months of the war, but they reflected the fundamental contradiction in Russian military planning. The Russians knew Ukrainian drones could reach Novorossiysk. They had deployed additional air defense systems. Panzer S-1 short-range air defense platforms positioned at 2 points around the harbor perimeter. They had established a patrol boat schedule for the harbor's inner basin. They had installed additional radar coverage. But they had not solved the fundamental problem: defending a harbor that is simultaneously a commercial port. The shipping lanes that large commercial vessels used to enter and exit Novorossiysk were the same lanes that surface drones could use for concealment. Blocking those lanes completely would have stopped the commercial traffic that Russia needed for trade. So the Russian solution was a compromise: enhanced vigilance, additional patrols, more radar coverage. That still left gaps a patient and innovative adversary could exploit. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because this operation shows something no official briefing will tell you. Innovation wins in the margins where defenders have made compromises. 81 minutes after launch, the 3 Magura V5 surface drones reached the bulk carrier's radar shadow in the outer harbor. They reduced speed to 12 knots, adjusted their formation spacing to 200 meters between drones, and began the final approach leg. The EW drone overhead was broadcasting its spoofing signal, creating phantom vessel returns on the harbor's vessel traffic radar that drew the attention of the Russian operator in the harbor control room. He was watching 3 ghost signatures in the northern sector of his display. He was not watching the southwestern approach carefully. The drones cleared the bulk carrier's shadow at 3:17 a.m. They accelerated to 42 knots. At that speed, Pier 7 was 6 minutes away. In the Ukrainian Naval Operations Center, the officer commanding the strike was watching telemetry feeds from all 3 surface drones and the surveillance drone orbiting at altitude. The data was clean. The drones were on course. The EW platform was operating normally. The Bober-class airstrike drones were on their approach vector, 7 minutes behind the surface drones. The surface drone telemetry was the critical feed. Each drone was transmitting its GPS position, speed, and heading at 1-second intervals. The officer watched the position dots move across his tactical display. 3 dots, moving northeast, closing. If you believe tactics win wars, not politics, type EastAlert in the comments. Because what happened in the next 6 minutes was pure tactics. The harbor's inner patrol boat, the small naval tender that had been moving through the inner basin, was on a southwest heading at this moment, moving away from Pier 7. Its crew did not see the surface drones coming. The thermal camera mounted on the patrol boat's mast was pointed forward, toward the harbor exit channel where the boat was headed. The first Magura V5 hit the barge's midship section at 3:23 a.m. The shaped charge detonated on contact, punching a hole approximately 4 meters in diameter through the barge's steel hull plating at the waterline. The explosion was violent enough to lift the barge's deck cargo, the stacked Kalibr shipping canisters, approximately half a meter off the deck before they slammed back down. 3 of the canisters on the portside stack toppled into each other. 2 fell against the pier fender structure. 4 seconds later, the second Magura V5 hit the barge's midship section 30 meters aft of the first impact point. A second hull breach. Water began pouring into the barge's forward cargo hold at a rate that made capsize within 12 minutes a mathematical certainty. 6 seconds after that, the third Magura V5 hit the barge's stern section. This impact was different. The warhead detonated against the barge's stern fuel tank, a 4,000-liter diesel fuel reservoir that fed the barge's own generators. The explosion sent a column of burning diesel fuel 40 meters into the air. The fireball was visible from the commercial port 3 kilometers away. The fire at the stern. The hull breaches flooding the forward holds. The barge was dying. But the Kalibr canisters on deck were still sealed, still intact. The chain reaction had not yet happened. 44 seconds after the first surface drone impact, the first Bober-class airstrike drone arrived overhead. The optical terminal guidance system acquired the barge's deck cargo area through the thermal bloom of the stern fire. The thermal contrast between the burning stern and the cooler midship deck cargo area was sufficient for the seeker to lock. The drone rolled into its terminal dive. Impact velocity, approximately 280 meters per second. The munition penetrated the lid of a Kalibr shipping canister in the midship stack. The canister contained a Kalibr NK cruise missile with a conventional fragmentation warhead and a full load of aviation fuel for its turbojet sustainer engine. The fuel detonated first. The warhead detonated 0.3 of a second later. The combined blast was equivalent to approximately 800 kilograms of TNT. The barge's deck structure failed completely across an 8-meter section. The adjacent canisters, 6 of them, stacked against each other, were engulfed in the blast. 2 detonated. 4 were ruptured and began burning. The burning aviation fuel from the ruptured canisters flowed across the deck and onto the pier's wooden fender structure. The second Bober-class drone arrived 11 seconds after the first. It hit the aft canister stack, the canisters that had been blown partially off their tie-downs by the first missile impact. Direct hit on a canister that was already compromised. Detonation immediate. The blast threw debris 200 meters across the naval pier complex. A section of the pier's concrete apron, approximately 15 meters long, broke away from the pier structure and fell into the harbor. Then the chain reaction began in earnest. The barge was now a platform of sequential explosions. Each detonating Kalibr warhead transmitted shockwave energy through the deck structure to adjacent canisters. Each burning fuel load fed the thermal energy that cooked off the propellant in nearby containers. The process was not instantaneous. It took 11 minutes from the first Bober strike to the point where the barge's structure failed completely and she began to settle rapidly into the harbor. But it was inexorable. By the time Russian harbor defense began to respond coherently, the outcome was already determined. The Pantsir S-1 battery on the eastern harbor perimeter attempted to engage the Bober drones with its radar-guided cannon system. The engagement was late. The first 2 drones had already completed their attacks. The Pantsir acquired the third Bober drone, which had been assigned a secondary target, the corvette at anchor, and engaged it at approximately 4 kilometers range. The drone was hit and destroyed before reaching its target. The corvette survived. The patrol boats in the harbor accelerated toward the barge, initially trying to approach the pier to assist. The heat from the burning missile fuel drove them back. 3 sailors on the pier's deck sustained burns. The barge crew, all 11 members, had abandoned the barge within 2 minutes of the first surface drone impact, jumping into the harbor water and swimming toward the pier ladders. 8 were recovered by the patrol boats. 3 were recovered by harbor emergency services approximately 20 minutes later. None were killed. Their survival came down to the time gap between the surface drone impacts and the onset of the catastrophic deck fire, a gap that gave them just enough time to get clear. Russian shore-based air defense systems. 400 batteries positioned at Novorossiysk and at Anapa airfield 40 kilometers to the northwest began radar searches after the attack. By the time they were in a position to engage, all Ukrainian drone platforms had either completed their attacks or were outside Russian surface-to-air engagement envelopes, returning on their recovery vectors to Ukrainian-controlled sea areas. The electronic warfare drone had already departed the area on a pre-planned egress route. It recovered successfully. What would NATO have done differently in planning this strike? Would they have used more platforms? Fewer? With more precision? Comment your tactical analysis. We read them all. The barge burned for 4 hours and 17 minutes before harbor fire services were able to suppress the remaining fires sufficiently to prevent the blaze from spreading to pier infrastructure. The Novorossiysk Port Authority ordered commercial vessel traffic halted for the duration of the firefighting operation, a decision that disrupted cargo handling at the port for the better part of a day. Satellite imagery collected in the 24 hours following the strike showed the barge partially submerged at Pier 7, her deck structure almost entirely destroyed, her hull sitting on the harbor bottom in 7 meters of water. The pier apron had sustained significant structural damage where the section had broken away. The crane at Pier 7's head, a fixed crane used for loading naval supply vessels, was destroyed by blast damage, its cab blown apart and its boom collapsed onto the pier. Ukrainian General Staff assessment, published through official channels in the aftermath, confirmed the destruction of the missile logistics node. Combat footage verification and OSINT investigations revealed the scale of what had been destroyed. Here is the answer to the tactical quiz from earlier. The correct answer is B-38 Kalibr missile canisters were destroyed or rendered non-recoverable in the attack. Ukrainian intelligence assessment, derived from satellite imagery analysis of the pre-strike barge deck layout and post-strike debris field documentation, estimated that the barge was carrying 41 canisters at the time of the attack. 3 canisters in the outer starboard stack were recovered from the pier apron with minimal damage. They had been thrown clear of the blast zone by the initial surface drone impacts and did not detonate. The remaining 38 were either destroyed by direct munition impact, cooked off in the subsequent chain reaction, or rendered unsafe for further use by fire and blast damage. At an estimated unit value of approximately $1, $1 million per Kalibr missile, including the missile itself and the associated logistics support package, the strike eliminated approximately $41, $8 million in Russian naval strike inventory. The damage to the pier crane and the pier apron represented additional infrastructure loss that Russian Naval Logistics Command would need weeks and significant resources to repair. The corvette at anchor survived, but without a functioning missile reload facility, her operational capability was severely degraded. She returned to interior anchorage and did not conduct strike operations for the subsequent period while Russian naval logistics attempted to establish alternative transfer arrangements. The operational impact extended beyond the immediate hardware losses. Intercepted Russian communications, fragments of which were published by Ukrainian intelligence in the following days, showed the response of Russian Black Sea Fleet Command to the strike. The fragments were consistent with a command element that had been caught off guard, that had not expected Ukrainian drone capability to reach this deep into what it considered a secure rear area. The communications showed officers demanding immediate accounting of remaining missile inventory at all Black Sea Fleet support facilities. They showed orders for immediate enhancement of harbor defense measures that had been requested weeks earlier and not yet implemented. They showed the frustration of commanders who had trusted in geographic distance as a substitute for actual defensive capability. Geography is not a defense. Distance is not a defense. The only defense against an innovative adversary is active, layered, integrated protection. And Russia had not built that at Novorossiysk because Russian military planners had convinced themselves they did not need to. That belief cost them 38 Kalibr missiles, a pier crane, a logistics barge, and, most expensively, the comfortable assumption that the eastern Black Sea coast was beyond Ukrainian reach. The Black Sea Fleet's eastern repositioning had been presented to Russian Naval Command as a solution to Ukrainian strike capability. What it actually created was a false sense of security combined with degraded operational capability. The fleet was now concentrated in a port less capable than Sevastopol of supporting intensive naval operations, with longer supply lines, worse infrastructure, and, as this strike demonstrated, harbor defense that was inadequate against the Ukrainian drone threat. Ukraine, meanwhile, had demonstrated something important about the trajectory of naval warfare in the Black Sea theater. The Magura V5 surface drone, the Bober airstrike drone, the coordinated electronic warfare package. These were not improvised field modifications. They represented a systematic investment in asymmetric naval capability that had been developing throughout the war. Ukraine had no surface navy to speak of when the full-scale invasion began. By this phase of the conflict, Ukrainian naval intelligence and naval drone operations had become one of the most effective anti-navy forces in modern military history, without ever operating a traditional warship. Innovation, patience, precision. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. Think about that specific tactical choice, reducing the surface drone package from 4 to 3 platforms when the navigation fault was detected 40 minutes before launch. The Ukrainian commander's decision to proceed with a modified strike rather than abort was validated by the outcome. But was it the right call? A strike with a faulty navigation system on one of the surface drones, a drone that might have deviated from its approach route and alerted harbor defenses prematurely, could have compromised the entire operation. The decision to drop the faulty drone and adjust targeting priorities was arguably correct. But it required the kind of real-time judgment under pressure that military doctrine struggles to teach. The strike on the Novorossiysk reload barge teaches several interconnected lessons. First, logistical nodes are targets. The Kalibr missile reload barge was not a warship. It was not an air defense system. It was a floating warehouse. But logistics enables combat power. Destroy the logistics node and you degrade the combat capability of the warships that depend on it. Ukrainian military planners understood this. Russian planners had underestimated the degree to which Ukrainian intelligence would identify and exploit logistical vulnerabilities deep in what they considered secure territory. Second, improvised solutions create new vulnerabilities. The Barge's missile transfer station was a Russian improvisation to compensate for the inadequacy of Novorossiysk's naval logistics infrastructure. The improvisation worked until it created a concentrated, predictable, inadequately defended target that Ukrainian intelligence could plan against at leisure. Third, electronic warfare integration multiplies drone effectiveness. The EW spoofing drone that preceded the surface drones was not glamorous. It did not destroy anything. But it created the window of radar confusion that allowed the surface drones to close to lethal range without triggering an effective harbor defense response. Drone warfare at this level of sophistication is not about single platforms. It is about coordinated packages where each element enables the others. Fourth, geographic distance is not security. The Black Sea Fleet's eastward repositioning created the illusion of safety through distance. Ukrainian drone capability had already broken that illusion in earlier operations against Novorossiysk. Russian naval planning had not fully internalized the lesson. The result was predictable. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. Now, 3 questions for you to consider. Was the Ukrainian decision to proceed with 3 surface drones instead of 4, made 40 minutes before launch when the navigation fault was detected, the right tactical choice? Or should the operation have been delayed until a fully functional 4th drone could be positioned? Could Russian harbor defense have prevented this attack if the Panzer S-1 batteries had been positioned differently? Perhaps on the western harbor perimeter rather than the eastern side, to engage drones approaching on the southwestern vector? And what would you have done differently as the Ukrainian strike commander? More surface drones? A different approach vector? A decoy element to fix the harbor patrol boat before the main strike? Leave your analysis in the comments. We read every one. Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. And if you want to understand the Black Sea drone war in depth, how Ukraine went from having no navy to destroying Russia's, the next video in this series is already waiting for you. The harbor at Novorossiysk is quieter now at Pier 7. The barge has been partially raised, her ruined hull an obstacle to normal port operations. The crane stands broken. The concrete apron where the pier section broke away has been temporarily barricaded. The corvette that was supposed to receive those 38 Kalibr missiles is still at anchor in the inner harbor, her tubes empty. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. Stay vigilant.